Welcome to ICAN Intelligence. In this masterclass, we are going to break down and completely master a really critical topic from your PSAF syllabus, Chapter 17, the functions of the cash office and subsidiary accounts. I promise you, by the end of this session, you are going to have the clarity and the confidence you need to handle any question that comes your way on this topic. So let's get started. Your journey to exam success really is a marathon, not a sprint. And to make sure you have expert guidance with you every single step of the way, just take a quick moment to like this masterclass and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a critical session that's designed to give you that extra edge in the exam hall. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to keep it structured and very thorough. We'll kick things off with a big picture overview, then we'll dive right into the core operations of the cash office and follow that up with security and control measures. After that, we are going to master bank reconciliation statements, and then we'll clear up any confusion between advances and impressed accounts. And finally, we'll wrap up with deposits before we put it all together with some real exam practice. All right, let's begin with that big picture. Look, Chapter 17 is foundational. It deals with what is essentially the lifeblood of the government's day-to-day financial world, cash. Getting a solid grip on this is just non-negotiable. But if you want to score those maximum marks, you have to learn to think like an examiner. So let's just pause here for a moment and ask what I think is the single most important question you can ask for any chapter you study. When an examiner writes a question about the cash office, what are they really trying to test? I can tell you right now, it's not just your ability to memorize a few definitions. No, it's something much deeper, something absolutely fundamental to public sector finance.
And here is the key that unlocks this entire chapter. The examiner is testing your grasp of three pillars: control, security, and accountability. Every single procedure, every document, every rule we're about to discuss today is designed to uphold one of these three principles. So please, burn these three words into your memory. They're the framework for every single correct answer you're going to write on this topic.
Okay, with that framework firmly in place in our minds, let's move on to our first section, core cash office operations. We're about to see exactly how these big ideas of control, security, and accountability are put into practice on a daily basis.
First things first, the official definition, exactly as you'll find it in your study text. The cash office is the unit responsible for receiving and paying cash, posting transactions into the cash book, managing bank accounts, and providing information on the cash position. Now, the key words an examiner is looking for here are receiving, paying, and posting. That's its operational DNA.
Now, at the heart of all these operations is the Treasury Cash Book, and you need to know the form number, TF-153A. This isn't just some ordinary notebook. It's a permanent, primary book of account. The responsibility for keeping this book perfectly falls to a sub-accounting officer, which is really just an officer who's been delegated the authority to manage financial records at a local or sub-treasury level. Let's take a closer look at its format.
Okay, let's break down the structure of this really crucial document, the TF-153A. The best way to think about it is like a detailed financial diary. The layout is a classic T account. Over on your left, you have the debit side, which is where you meticulously record all the money coming in, the receipts. You'll notice columns like from whom received, which tells you the source, classification, which is the accounting head, and treasury receipt number, which gives you that all-important audit trail. Then, on the right, you have the credit side, which tracks every single kobo going out, all the payments. It captures who was paid and the check number for verification. This whole format creates this beautiful, clear, and auditable trail of all cash movements, which, as you know, is fundamental for accountability.
Now for a term that I've seen trip up students time and time again, the contra entry. So what is it? Well, a contra entry is simply an internal transfer. It's just recording the movement of cash between, say, the office safe and the bank, or the other way around. A great example is just withdrawing cash from the bank to use for petty expenses in the office. Now, here is the crucial point, and it's a common exam trap. Because this isn't a payment to some external third party, it does not require a payment voucher. It's just like moving money from your left pocket to your right.
And of course, the movement of cash naturally leads us into our next critical section, security and control measures. If cash is the lifeblood of the organization, how do we protect it from leaks and from theft? This section ties directly back to our core principles of control and security.
To protect public funds, there are several controls that are just not negotiable. First up, establishment of cash limits.
You set a maximum amount of cash that can be held in the office at any one time. This minimizes risk. Second, daily banking of all takings. This ensures that money isn't just left sitting in the office overnight, which greatly reduces the opportunity for theft. Third, the use of a check summary register. This acts as a fantastic internal check because it's usually maintained by someone other than the cashier, which ensures a good segregation of duties. And finally, proper security for documents with monetary value. You have to remember, a blank checkbook or a local purchase order in the wrong hands is just as dangerous as a bag full of cash. And now we come to what is arguably the most powerful control tool of them all, and it happens to be a favorite topic for examiners: the bank reconciliation statement. Examiners love this because it tests not just your technical skill, but your attention to detail and your real fundamental understanding of verification and accountability.
So why do the cash book balance and the bank statement balance almost never agree at the end of the month? Well, the differences usually come down to timing and omissions. Let's list them all out. You've got unpresented checks. These are checks you've written and recorded, but the person you gave it to hasn't cashed it yet. Then there are uncredited deposits, or lodgements. This is cash or checks you paid into the bank, but they haven't cleared and shown up on the statement yet. You also have bank charges and interest, little fees or earnings the bank has applied that you don't know about yet. Then, direct debits or credits, payments or receipts the bank makes for you based on standing orders. Of course, you have dishonored checks. A check someone gave you has bounced. And finally, you have simple errors, which can be made by you in the cash book or by the bank in the statement.
Okay, let's apply this by walking through this example from your study pack. We start with the balance as per our adjusted cash book, which is 500,000 naira. First, we need to account for things we've recorded that the bank hasn't yet. So we add the 5,000 naira in unpresented checks. We also add the 1,000 naira in interest on an investment that we just found out about on the bank statement. That brings our working total to 506,000. Next, we less or subtract items like the 2,000 naira uncredited deposit that's still processing. And we also subtract the 1,000 naira in bank charges. This brings us down to our final figure of 503,000 naira, which absolutely must match the balance shown on the bank statement. This whole process gives us total verification.
All right, let's now turn our attention to subsidiary accounts. Specifically, we're going to clarify two terms that frequently cause a lot of confusion for students: advances and imprest. I can't stress this enough. Mastering the difference between these two is vital for theory questions.
This slide does a brilliant job of showing the core differences. An advance is a cash grant given to an officer for a specific duty, and it's often a pretty significant one, like official travel. This money has to be fully accounted for, or retired. On the other hand, an imprest is a fixed, usually smaller amount, we call it a float, given to an officer for minor, petty expenses. When that money is spent, it isn't retired, it is reimbursed back up to its original float level. So if you need a way to remember it, think: advance is retired, imprest is reimbursed. That distinction is absolutely key.
Now, because advances can involve large sums of public money, the rules that govern them are extremely strict. And you'll notice how they just scream control and accountability. An officer cannot get a new advance if a previous one for the exact same purpose is still outstanding. All advances must be authorized by an appropriate senior officer. They have to be retired promptly as soon as the duty is done. And crucially, an advance is not a shortcut. It cannot be granted for services where a normal payment voucher could and should be raised.
We're now going to cover our final key account type, which is deposits. We'll give this the attention it deserves before we pull everything together and move into that all-important exam practice phase. This is a really critical distinction to make. A deposit account is used to record money that the government is holding on behalf of third parties. That's the key point. This money is not government revenue. It is a liability. A common example would be a retention fee that's held from a contractor. And because it's not the government's money, it has to be managed with extreme care in a separate deposit ledger to ensure full accountability. All right, we've covered the theory. We understand the definitions, the documents, and the controls. But now, for the most important part of all, how does this translate into marks in the exam hall? Let's break down a past question from the ICAN Pathfinder.
So, here's the scenario. Notice the role they've put you in, an accountant in the Treasury Control Unit. And your task is to create a checklist of major concerns when you're examining payment vouchers. See, the examiner isn't just asking you to define a payment voucher. They're testing your ability to apply the principles of control and audit in a real-world, practical scenario.
Here is exactly how you structure a high-scoring answer.
Your checklist should be a series of sharp, control-focused questions. Step 1. Voucher control. Are the payment vouchers, or PVs, received through a controlled schedule or a voucher movement register? This checks your input control. Step 2. Verification. Are the PVs properly checked for accuracy, for correct coding, and for proper authorization? This is all about data integrity. Step 3. Payment security. Is there a good safeguard in place to make sure payment is made only to the rightful person? This is about fraud prevention. Step 4. Audit trail. Is there clear evidence of a prepayment audit before the payment goes out? That's a key internal control. And Step 5. Timeliness. Are payments being made promptly after the voucher is passed? Delays can be a huge red flag for mismanagement or even fraud. This systematic approach shows the examiner you have the mindset of a competent public sector accountant.
Before we conclude, let's do a rapid-fire recap and lock in the absolute essentials for your exam. Cash Office. It's the operational hub for receiving, paying, and recording. Bank Reconciliation, your #1 tool for verification and control. Advances, a grant that must be retired. Imprest, a float that must be reimbursed. And above all, the 3 pillars that govern everything: control, security, and accountability. Master these concepts, and you've mastered this chapter.
You now have the structured knowledge you need to confidently tackle Chapter 17. Here at ICAN Intelligence, your exam success is truly our mission. If this masterclass has helped bring you clarity, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow students. And before you go, think about this. In a high-pressure government environment, which of all the controls we talked about today do you think is the most likely to fail and why? I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments. Thank you, and I wish you the very best in your examinations.